A rivalry born not from ambition alone, but from pain, that a brotherhood shattered before it had time to harden, and a silence that lasted longer than most bands ever survive. For decades, fans thought they understood the story. Dave Mustaine was fired. Metallica moved on. Megadeth rose from the ashes. End of discussion. But the truth has never been that clean. Because beneath the riffs, the records, the sold-out arenas, and the mythology of heavy metal, there has always been something unfinished between James Hetfield and Dave Mustaine. Something unresolved. Something human. And now, at an age when most legends stop looking backward, James Hetfield has begun doing the opposite. Speaking, reflecting, admitting things he once buried under silence. So, the question isn't just what happened, that it's why it still matters. And why, after all these years, the wound still hasn't fully closed. To understand that, you have to go back to the beginning, before the fame, before the feud, back to a time when metal itself was still being invented. In the early 1980s, heavy metal was restless, loud, aggressive, and searching for something faster and more dangerous than what came before. In Southern California, that hunger collided with raw ambition when a handful of young musicians crossed paths, unaware they were about to change music forever. James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich were just kids with big ideas and bigger attitudes. They weren't polished. They weren't disciplined. But they were obsessed. Obsessed with speed, power, and pushing sound beyond its limits. What they lacked was a spark. That spark arrived in the form of Dave Mustaine. From the moment he entered the picture, Mustaine was impossible to ignore. His guitar playing wasn't just fast, it was vicious. Jagged riffs, wild solos, a sense of danger that felt unfiltered and unrestrained. He didn't just play metal, he embodied it. Early Metallica songs carried his fingerprints everywhere. The aggression, the sharpness, the refusal to soften edges. Tracks that would later become legendary were forged in rooms thick with sweat, alcohol, and volatile personalities. But talent was only part of Mustaine's identity. The other part was chaos. He drank hard. He fought harder. Rehearsals could turn explosive without warning. What energized the music also destabilized the band. They admired his ability, but they feared his unpredictability. Metallica wasn't just writing songs. They were surviving each other. And slowly, that tension began to crack something fundamental. The breaking point didn't arrive during a concert or a recording session. It came through something almost absurd in hindsight. A damaged car, a dog, a night soaked in alcohol and frustration. What followed wasn't just an argument, it was violence. For James Hetfield, loyalty to the band was non-negotiable. And in that moment, the line between brotherhood and survival became painfully clear. Behind closed doors, Hetfield and Ulrich wrestled with a decision they never imagined making so early. Dave Mustaine was essential to their sound, but increasingly impossible to manage. His fire threatened to burn everything down before it even began. So they chose the band. Just days before entering the studio to record what would become their debut album, they fired him. No warning, no goodbye worth the name. They put him on a bus and sent him away with nothing but his gear and a lifetime of resentment. For Mustaine, it wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. He had helped build something from nothing, and in a single moment, it was taken from him. That bus ride back to Los Angeles wasn't quiet reflection. It was the birthplace of a vow. Metallica hadn't destroyed him, they had created him. Mustaine didn't retreat. He transformed. Fueled by humiliation and rage, he poured everything into building a new band, not as an alternative, but as a direct challenge. Megadeth wasn't formed from peace or artistic curiosity. It was forged in anger. Every riff became a weapon. Every lyric a declaration. When Megadeth's debut arrived, it didn't sound like a newcomer. It sounded like a warning shot. Fast, technical, unapologetic. One song in particular carried a message no one missed. A reworked version of material Mustaine had written during his Metallica days, delivered faster and harsher, as if to say, this was always mine, but revenge alone doesn't sustain a career. What Mustaine did next is what cemented his legacy. He pushed metal forward. He doubled down on complexity. While Metallica gradually explored melody and structure, Megadeth leaned into technical ferocity. Intricate solos, whiplash tempos, no compromises, and the rivalry grew. Mustaine fed it openly. Interviews became battlegrounds. Accusations flew. Fans listened, and the divide hardened. But while Mustaine externalized his pain, James Hetfield did the opposite. He went quiet. James Hetfield didn't fight the war in public. He fought it in the studio. After Mustaine's departure, there was a vacuum inside Metallica. And into that space, Hetfield stepped fully. Not just as a singer, but as a leader, as a writer, as the emotional center of the band. The guilt followed him. The pressure, too. Ride the Lightning wasn't just an album. It was a statement. Sharper songwriting. Deeper themes. Proof that Metallica wasn't crippled by the loss, but evolving beyond it. Then came Master of Puppets. A towering achievement. Brutal yet sophisticated. A record that didn't just define Metallica, but metal itself. And in doing so, it shifted the rivalry. Metallica wasn't reacting anymore. They were setting the standard. Still, Mustaine's presence lingered like an unresolved echo. Fans dissected credits, compared riffs, debated who truly shaped the early sound. And Mustaine never let the world forget his role. Hetfield heard it all, but instead of responding, he buried himself deeper in the work. Albums grew bigger. The audience expanded. Metallica crossed into territory no metal band had ever reached. To some, it was selling out. To Hetfield, it was survival. As Metallica's fame exploded, Hetfield's inner struggles intensified. Addiction, self-doubt, the pressure of legacy. He carried it all quietly, and beneath it all, the unresolved fracture with Mustaine never fully healed. For Mustaine, no amount of success erased the feeling of being cut out of history. Even as Megadeth became a pillar of metal, comparisons never stopped. And neither did the bitterness. Years passed, albums stacked up, both men aged, and slowly something shifted. Time softened the edges. Then, unexpectedly, the silence broke. When the two men finally sat across from each other years later, there was no posturing left, no bravado, just decades of unspoken pain filling the room. Mustaine wasn't angry. He was wounded. He spoke about being discarded, about never being acknowledged. About the simple words he never heard. Thank you. Hetfield listened. And when he spoke, it wasn't defensiveness that came out. It was remorse. He talked about survival, about chaos, about choices made too young and too fast. There was no clean resolution, no dramatic reconciliation. But something profound happened. The myth cracked. For the first time, fans didn't see rivals. They saw two men shaped by the same trauma, responding in opposite ways. And that moment changed how the story was told forever. Years later, hope flickered again. Quiet conversations, careful words. The idea of collaboration surfaced not as nostalgia, but as closure, revisiting early material, reclaiming shared history. For fans, it would have been monumental. But old wounds don't disappear just because time has passed. When the subject of credit and ownership surfaced, the fragile balance collapsed. The conversation didn't explode. It didn't need to. It simply stopped. Once again, silence returned. And once again, the past proved heavier than the present. While the musicians carried their private burden, fans carried it loudly. Metallica versus Megadeth wasn't just a preference. It was identity. One band represented evolution and scale. The other represented purity and defiance. Debates raged for years, and yet as time passed, something unexpected happened. Perspective. New generations listened without baggage. They heard brilliance on both sides. They recognized that the rivalry itself had sharpened both bands. Without Mustaine, Metallica might not have pushed as hard. Without Metallica, Megadeth might not have burned as fiercely. The conflict didn't weaken metal. It strengthened it. So, where does that leave them now? Two legends. Two paths. One origin story that can never be rewritten. They may never share a stage again. They may never collaborate. They may never fully agree on the past, but their bond, fractured as it is, remains one of the most important in music history. Because sometimes the greatest stories aren't about reconciliation. They're about impact. And the truth is, heavy metal would not be what it is without both James Hetfield and Dave Mustaine. Together and apart, they shaped something bigger than either of them. The rivalry didn't destroy them, it defined them. And that unfinished tension, that lingering what if, is exactly why their story refuses to fade. Because some legends aren't meant to end cleanly. They're meant to echo,